The Wednesday, June 5th, 2024, 5:30 PM meeting of the Finance Committee. We are at the Public Safety Complex at 576 Pleasant Street in Paxton. We have a committee membership of 7, 4 is a quorum. I determine that we have a quorum. The meeting is officially opened. We have 2 other members en route, and hopefully they'll join us shortly. You see on the screen an agenda for this evening's meeting. It's also been sent to all members of the Finance Committee, and I think what I'd like to do is to start with the town budget slash final budget that Heather sent us some material, and if we can have the budget summary.
Town only?
There it is, yep. And focus on the 2 columns to the right. The one to the far right will hold for a moment. The one shaded in green is the one that we're speaking of at this particular moment. And if you don't mind, Jeremy, you can scroll down. You'll see that it is a balanced budget, including 3 or 4 lines up from the bottom. Part of the $950,000 override that we have. What is not in detail reflected here, but this particular column, and it would be too magical to do it, but if we were to throw the revenue up at the same time, you would see that this reflects a deficit of $835,500. We voted a meeting or so ago to lack of a better word, add to that some money to go into 2 separate stabilization funds to the tune of $114,500, which speaks to the point of the $950,000 override that we'll speak to also in a moment. If you can slide up to the 4th expense from the cost center from the top, the reserve fund, you recall that we increased that from by 10,000 from 40,000 to 50,000. On a screen that is not shown, we also increased free cash. We also increased investment income. Those 3 items were voted on at our last Finance Committee meeting. So what is left for us to do this evening with respect to that green column and that particular budget, which assumes an override will pass, is to vote approval. The only changes are the 3 or 4 that I just mentioned, and those have already been separately voted on. So now I'm looking for a motion to move approval for this particular budget.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. It passes. So now, with respect to that particular $950,000, if I can ask Jeremy to call up what the ballot question is. Which, by any standard, is plain vanilla. This has now been circulated, I believe, to the public for early mail-in voters. Heather, you want to add to that point?
Yeah, about 600 ballots from folks who earlier this calendar year had selected the postcard that it went out to everyone to send them a ballot for every election for the calendar year. Have been sent a ballot. A few of them have actually already come back.
Good, thank you. So there's also been various discussion at the Finance Committee meetings, Select Board meetings, and if I'm not mistaken, even a joint meeting of the two, that maybe something needs to be presented and prepared that would speak more to the point of what is in that $950,000, if you could call that informational one up.
Is that the informational guide?
Yep. So this right here is a first attempt at having an informational guide, and I want to be quick to note that it's an informational guide, it's not an advocacy statement, but it basically has a draft watermark through it for approval of the Finance Committee this evening. Then it would be sent, it's already been shared with the town administrator, but at some point it will be shared with the Select Board, hopefully for their edit and approval on Monday. I'm sure it's going to be run by town council as well. It's designed to kind of check all the boxes in terms of one of the questions that's out there in the public square is, well, why is there a deficit this year and there wasn't last year? And we go on in that paragraph, starting with some of the costs and factors. I'm not going to read it to you. Hopefully it will be in the public square soon enough, but there have been increases in stormwater, there have been increases in retirement and pension and town insurance and health insurance, and the school, Wachusett Regional included, and Bay Path included, and all the like, not the least of which is some normal everyday increases in our public safety and public works. So that described what caused the particular deficit. We also go on to say after that that there are no increased positions, there are no new programs, there are no new initiatives. This is just to keep the lights on and the town running. And we also make point of the fact that, as we already mentioned, there's a deficit of $835,500. The question is, well, why is the override $950,000? Collectively, the Select Board and the Finance Committee felt that there was need to put money into certain stabilization funds for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is putting some back into the general stabilization fund to the tune of $57,250. Is an attempt to replenish that fund for $86,000 that was withdrawn from it last year to avoid an override. And then another $57,250 goes into capital depreciation so that we can buy some small equipment purchases. It's not going to buy a heavy-duty DPW truck or anything of that nature, but at least it will allow for small purchases to be made contemporaneously without passing that cost or that debt obligation on to the taxpayers. And good question is, how'd you arrive at $57,250? It was not exactly a coin toss, but we just split the $114,500, and the collective wisdom was fair is fair, put half in each of the funds. And then we go on at the bottom. I have some very good news to report. I can't read my own writing. The impact at the bottom, and this will be corrected on in a short notice, the impact to the average single-family home would be $556 per year. So with that, that's the facts of the details supporting it. In terms of informational, I think we've checked all the boxes, and I think we've been careful not to inappropriately advocate for it. So what I'm looking for is the Finance Committee to move approval so that it can be moved on to the Select Board for their approval. You'll note at the bottom, if you, excuse me one second, if you notice at the bottom, the signatories are both bodies, the Select Board and the Finance Committee. I know you want to remind me that today is June 5th, but I put June 10th in anticipation that the Select Board will approve it at their meeting next Monday on June 10th. So.
I just have one question. The
Yep.
last line, is it clear that the 556 increase is per annum? Nowhere does it say per year.
Good point. It does not say that. We would take that as a friendly amendment.
So just keep in mind that it could say 556, but, you know, the estimate is 556 for the first year, then it all rolls together, and then the next year, it might not be a 556, like, it's not gonna be necessarily 556 more than the year before, it's just the first year, that's the impact. So I just don't want people to think, right, like, for instance, Rutland, they just did MS4, and MS4, they're assessing people X dollars per year, like, that's a set amount. I don't want them to think next year they're gonna get a separate bill or added on their bill from their base of 556.
The only question, again, the only clarification I'm seeking is that they understand that, to your point, for the first year, 556 is what they can expect on the average single-family home.
And I think that's what you can say, would be 556 for the first year,
But it doesn't say the first year.
but Mark could add that.
Yeah, I think that's all you said.
That's what he was looking for.
That's what I was looking for.
Okay,
So I think rather than I'll take that under advisement, I'll add it, and I'll send a fresh one to
Thank
the
you.
Select Board. Does that
So
make
the
sense?
two changes.
I just
need
want to
to-
make sure that it's clear to the consumer that's reading this,
Yep, you make,
that number is for the 2025 budget.
So the two changes would be 556 and for the first year. Okay.
so with,
I'm going to make a motion for the Finance Committee to approve the informational guide with the two changes, 556 from 586, and to add for the first year.
I second.
motion's made, second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Abstentions? None? Motion carries. So, Heather, a little guidance from you. I think it might be efficient if we went to the articles, and we could basically deal with 4 of the 5 this evening.
okay. So we have a draft set of our.
This?
Nope, that's the memo. So we did a draft set of the special town meeting articles and sent it for the first look from legal, just to make sure the language looked correct. SB has not reviewed these, they have not approved them yet. This will be happening on Monday night's meeting. But last meeting, Steve did ask us to put together a draft thing of warrant articles for this evening, just for the Finance Committee to have an initial review. So the initial version of the town, special town meeting warrant for June 27th currently has 5 articles on it. It will be there eventually.
This it?
There you are. Yeah, I think so. It's STM.
This it?
There you go.
Okay.
Yep. So it's 5 proposed articles on it right now. In conversations with legal, and I'm waiting for a quick email from legal, just to have it in writing so I can send it out to both FinCom and SB. His recommendation was, when it came to the budget articles, because we're still looking at the possibility of 2 articles and we don't know which one's going to prevail until we figure out what happens 2 days prior, 3 days prior on June 24th. And the attempt to cause less confusion with numbers and so forth, his suggestion was what we had talked about previously, which was the possibility of putting together just a town budget article that doesn't say any numbers to it. And then his suggestion was, once you figure out what happens with the actual ballot vote, you put in the numbers in the motion, and that's what people see. Usually, that's not what we do. FinCom has said on a number of occasions they don't like articles without numbers. The Select Board has said on a number of occasions they don't like articles without specific numbers. They like to give people the information. That being said, this is not normal for us. This is not a normal year. This is not a normal thing we're doing where we've already been to town meeting once. People have already seen all the numbers. These numbers wouldn't be higher than the numbers they saw. These would be lower than the numbers they saw. It's just in the attempt to cause less confusion. That being said, it's up to FinCom, ultimately up to the select board with it being their warrant on how they want to put it forward. The draft you have before you currently spells out both of those articles. It does not have them as just a blank budget article. So if I can, I'd like to walk through what we have here, listen to any feedback. I'll bring the feedback to the select board and see how they wish to opine on Monday. Any questions before I do that? Okay. So Article 1, so this actually came up, Larissa had a really good point, our town accountant, she said, hey, you know, I'm a little concerned because I don't want multiple budgets approved through town meeting, and then we have to figure out what we're actually dealing with when we do the paperwork for the state. So I did reach out to Brian. Brian said he doesn't have any issue with this, and he actually thought it was a nice idea. It's just rescinding the prior article that was approved, the override contingent budget article that we had passed on May 6th. For Article 17, I believe he's gonna tweak the language slightly on that. But in general, he thought it was a good idea to have that article. It just cleans the slate before we get into discussions and says, thank you for voting for that article previously, because we're no longer dealing with those numbers. We just wanna wash our hands of that article, put it aside and move on. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It
Mark?
does. I think, though, that, having said that, I'm inclined for us to still take a vote to recommend approval of rescinding this.
Okay.
Notwithstanding the town council may tweak a little bit, I'm assuming that the tweak would be slight and not change the context or the spirit of the article.
Correct, and also with that vote, keep in mind that the select board hasn't even formally closed the warrant yet or or voted on the warrant. So I don't anticipate that they're gonna change Article 1. That being said, just remember, if you vote on something, it could ultimately still change before we get to town meeting.
So our options are this evening not to do anything, to meet again before town meeting, or meet at town meeting to vote. So we have four choices: vote for it, don't do anything, meet again, and meet at town meeting.
So
So I
in-
defer to the committee as to what their wish is.
What's the probability that any of these five are gonna change?
Well, my crystal ball's broken.
Okay, so
But I-
that means probably.
I would say more likely than not, I think they'll probably go with number 1, no problem, because that seems like just good housekeeping and makes sense.
I appreciate that, but we don't deal with, we gotta stop with the probablys. This is what's getting us into so much trouble in the past, where we forget to vote on things because we push them around. I think if there's any chance that any of these are gonna have even a word changed, we should defer to town meeting when we know it's set, or a meeting point after these are set.
I agree totally.
And it's hard, I know it's hard for everyone to meet, but since the Board of Selectmen sets these, let them set them and then we can vote on them. That would just, and whenever it happens, after the 10th, until we have what, how many, till town meeting after the 2?
27th?
Okay, so-
We have to post the warrant, but.
I just, I would hate to, this is the confusion that we had when we had to vote on the budget right before the last town meeting, because we got sidetracked because things might change. I think that I personally would prefer to have these select board approved before we vote on them. I'm just one person, so I'd appreciate any other opinions.
Well, I think you're two people.
Steve?
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. Even if we pull together a Zoom meeting for 15 minutes, then,
Totally agree.
And realistically speaking, so we're only in the beginning of June, there's a probability that we'll still have year-end transfers between now and town meeting that will need to be looked at. So even if there's
Such an
something on
optimist.
Zoom,
So we gotta have another meeting anyways, right? Yeah, how do you feel?
I'm available Friday nights at 7:30. How about yourself?
No.
Okay.
Well, this is gonna happen, right, so these are gonna get, when does this get closed?
So Monday they'll close it. I anticipate that they'll vote the warrant on Monday night to finalize it, and then we'll get it posted on the 14th.
Okay, so let's hold them, but with that said, let me give a Reader's Digest version of what they are. The Article 1 is to dispense with the $1,440,000. Article 2 essentially is the budget with the $950,000 override. Article 3 is putting $57,250 that we just spoke about into the general stabilization fund. Article 4 is putting $250,000, $57,250 into the capital depreciation fund. I let my capital improvement planning committee self get in the way of that, sorry about that. And then Article 4 is, Article 5 is contingent upon the override not passing, which I would clearly put a hold on and not opine on this evening. So that's the 5 we're looking at. So, good, okay. So now, without flashing the agenda up there, we're kind of looking at a budget need to plan. We're not advocating for this, but the point of the override failing. And you gave, if we could go back to that, there we go, right there, on the far right. What I'd like to do, time permitting, and I think it does, is to share something that I prepared, and I didn't want to send it to you gentlemen at the last minute, so I didn't send it at all. But if we could just put something up on the screen right now, and let me just spend a minute walking through it. That was the,
Oh, this is the one you sent to me when I was in the
yeah,
car.
right.
What's it called?
Additional-
Additional analysis?
Additional analysis. So, I would, and I don't want to be flippant about this, but I would describe this as the good, the bad, and the ugly. This essentially is looking at the override failing. And on an earlier screen, that Jeremy has put up 2 or 3 times already, there are 45 cost centers, if you were to count those right there. And then going back, what I did, because the header of that said town only, I've added the Wachusett Regional School District and Bay Path Regional Voc to get a total population of 47 cost centers. If you were to analyze that schedule that Heather has carefully put together for us, you'd see that there are 24 cost centers that there's no change regarding the override failing. Their budget would remain the same whether or not the override passed or whether or not it failed. Wachusett Regional's budget does not change based on the override. Bay Path does not change on the override. So that's 26 cost centers that there's no change whatsoever. Now, somebody could say, well, that's more than half. Somebody will say, that is more than half. Somebody will say, well, it's just more than half. But it's a lot, no matter how you look at it. Further analysis is that there are 3 cost centers that have their budgets cut for less than $500. One for $100, one for $200, and one for $400, for a total of 7. There are 8 cost centers that have their budgets cut for a range of $500 to $2,500, for a total of $11,000, as you see there. No small matter. A big deal to every one of those departments, to be sure. One cost center, the tree warden is cut by $36.50, and 12 of those lead to costs of a little more than $15,000. So if you add those 12 where there are cuts, in combination with the 26 where there are no cuts, that's 38 out of 47 cost centers where the total change between the override and the non-override is 15,000, and don't mean to round up or down, but nearly 16 grand. Under normal circumstances, we would jump into those 38 cost centers and we would cut $15,000. In prior years, we've done it for way more than that, sometimes as much as $100,000. So the truth is it really comes down to 8 or 9 budgets. And the 5 that are kind of second tier, I don't mean to offend them by referring that to them that way, but there's the MIS and the IT, there's the building maintenance, there's the building department, there's the library and the recreation. All pretty big numbers, none of which would necessarily shut those down, not, again, trying to advocate here. In fact, the recreation, taking it out of the budget for 3 years now, that's been talked about, taking it out of the budget and moving it to that particular special revenue fund. It's been pushed back each of those 3 years, and, here it is under a more dire situation. The 3 800-pound gorillas are police, fire, and DPW. And again, I don't mean to dismiss any of the others, but the override, to some extent, comes down to what kind of police department, fire department, and DPW department do we have? And what I've done here is I've compared their the amount of cuts in each of those, and you can see the 3 of them total $799,000. The deficit is $835,000. And you might say, well, that math's not working well, but you need to look at the last item on the page, because with some of those cuts in police and fire and DPW, we needed to add, strangely, to employee benefits, which is not really employee benefits as much as it's unemployment compensation. So we've got to protect against the fact that if somebody loses their job, they could draw on the unemployment pool. So again, I'm not making an advocacy, I'm just trying to analyze a little further than beyond what we've just simply seen, and you can see the percentages here are substantial. I'm not going to advocate that the police and fire should get together, and why is the police higher than the fire, but I'll let the 2 chiefs, work that out. But I think my question is, Heather, were these cuts right here made with the individual department heads separately, or was it a department head meeting, or was it a collection of department heads, and did one department know what they were giving up and also know what the other department was giving up?
Sure. So what we ended up doing was we started with the number that we had to cut, the reduction. And then we started, with my office, because we oversee quite a few different line items, right, or departmental cost centers on this. We went through all of those, and anything that was not required, mandated, legally required, or absolutely necessary, we did reductions in, to the extent we could. Then from there, I worked with each of the small departments, and we figured out what we could do. The thing that's hard with a lot of the small departments is most offices only have about 1 person in them in the first place. They're not even usually up to 40 hours, with the exception of my office with Donna and myself. And then even if you cut everything else, ironically enough, you still have to have an accountant to pay bills. right? And the time to pay bills is still gonna be the same amount of time. So you end up not being able to reduce a lot. That being said, I sat down with every single one of the small departments and said, what can we reduce but still allows you to function and provide services to the town? Reduce services to the town, but still provide services. Went through all the small departments. Once we went through everything, we then came back and we had the three large departments left, police, fire, and DPW. I looked at police, fire, and DPW as if they were their own pie with just those three departments. I then figured out what percentage their budgets were compared to each other for last year, right? And FY '24's pie, if you just put those three in there, who holds what share of the pie? Then I looked at a modified version, which was the same thing, but, you know, there's one department, the fire department, that has ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation that offsets the budget to going towards particularly the staffing side, right? And the expenses. So we took that number and I modified the pie when you take that out of their budget. So if you say, okay, it's $1 million, but we contribute, you know, 400,000 from ambulance receipts that you wouldn't get there if you didn't have staffing, that leaves 600,000. What percentage of the pie do they hold in this case and everybody else? And then we went to FY '25's budget. What was the requested numbers from those three different departments? And what's the piece of the pie in that case? We took the three numbers, right? Let's say, I'm just randomly throwing out numbers here, I don't have them in front of me. Say 25, 30%, and, you know, 27%. The average was 27%. So the reduction was 27% of the amount of money we have to cut by. So if there was $700,000 left, that means that Department 1 has to absorb the cuts of 27% of that 700,000. So it seems a little crazy, but that was as methodical as we could get on those pieces. That being said, you know, folks are very good whenever there was anything that was left on the table and, you know, could really go to their department, you know, unless it was gonna save a body, they, you know, everyone was good about making sure we save as many bodies as humanly possible.
So, I think, notwithstanding further discussion, we certainly, I think, should hold off on a vote of this.
May I ask a question?
Yeah,
Can we go back up, please, Jeremy? I would ask, Heather, that you don't try to conclude what I'm trying to get to, because I'm not sure I'm where I'm going.
Okay.
So just please listen to the question, all right? Did we give any thought to the cutting or going back to the Worcester Regional School District or Bay Path to see if they could cut anything that they viewed as non-essential helping us again? And if we did not, was it because at the town meeting, we voted for both of these budgets and they were approved? That's my question.
So we did not specifically ask that question. I can say that in meetings with the superintendent, they are, or at least he is committed to helping guide the school committee in the direction that if they come into additional funds, say the state senate's version of the budget, which puts more money from into chapter 70 for the school. I think it totals, if they go with that allocation number, it adds to their amount from chapter 70 of approximately $500,000, that they would pass those reductions on to the individual municipalities. The problem is, just kind of like last year, where we waited until the end to try to get their number changes in play before we made our decisions. I don't think we're gonna have a concluded state budget and a potential reduction from the Wachusett Regional School District numbers, if there is going to be one, before we get to town meeting. And if there is gonna be one, and it does happen to slide in, I don't think we're gonna know much before, you know, doing something on the floor of town meeting.
So let me replay what I think I just heard you say.
Okay.
Based upon the fact that we don't know what the state is going to do relative to aid and the potential benefit to the municipalities, including the town of Paxton, we don't know that Worcester Regional School District or Bay Path's budget is going to change. However, we also didn't approach either one of them and ask if they had any room to reduce relative to what was presented to us as budget allocations. Is that a correct statement?
So I would say, as far as approaching them, no, I haven't. I would also say that in conversations with him, as well as his presentations and so forth, you know, they've talked very strongly about the fact that they're already very tightly budgeted at this point, and they're already concerned about having enough money even in their wage lines to be able to make it through next year without tapping reserves themselves.
Okay, and at no point in any of that decision to approach did not stem from the vote that was taken at the last town meeting.
No, so we don't usually, I mean, they usually look at everything once they get the votes in from the various municipalities. Princeton hasn't voted yet,
Has
have
Princeton
they?
voted yet?
I don't think
June
so.
11th.
Was that June
June
11th?
11th.
So
June
no,
11th.
next
Has
Tuesday.
one still said no, or did they,
Sterling has said no.
okay,
So then Princeton's the
So
last.
Princeton's the last one, and they're on the fence.
So I would envision though, Steve, if Princeton says no, I would think more likely than not that what the school committee will do is they'll try to wait until they get a decision, or hopefully they'll have a decision sooner than later from the state relative to the Chapter 70 funding, and then they would reduce the assessments by that figure.
okay, thank you. I mean, I want to go on record that I think the three, as you said, the 800-pound gorillas in the room are absolutely critical to every person that lives in the town of Paxton. And I would be dead set against those three cost centers being cut ahead of others. So
Could I
that's
just?
not just because the guys in the back of the room. I feel they're absolutely critical
I agree.
services
I
to
agree.
this community.
So we could get into Heather's detail of those three in just a minute, but if I could just piggyback on your question about the schools. Technically, they were voted as approved at the annual town meeting on separate articles. So to some extent, what we can do or ask, that horse has left the barn because we've already approved that
That's
particular budget.
what I asked. That's what, in fact, what I was
The
asking.
second thing, I want to be factual and not scandalous here, but there were delayed audit reports for Wachusett Regional to submit to the state that finally got submitted in their ED, their excess and deficiency fund, which is equivalent of our free cash fund. They were awarded $1.8 million last year, and we got $18,000 as an adjustment to our assessment. That's where the Wachusett Regional Assessment Fund balance the other night when we were making reserve fund transfers or transfers. So my point is, if Princeton votes to approve it, I would not hold my breath that we're gonna get anything back. If it is, it's gonna be at the $10,000 to $20,000. It's not gonna be at the $799,000
Understood.
variety.
Understood.
So, I think I was fair in explaining that, so. So Heather, and maybe we can open up, with time permitting, to the three police, fire. My understanding is police, that the big issue is night service is off the table with respect to the override not passing. And then the summation of the fire is that there's an administrative assistant that is displaced, and as many as 20 part-time firefighters are also displaced. All critical in the DPW.
Mark,
we
on the
just
fire,
fin-
there's also two
Two
full-time firefighter paramedics.
Two full-time
Right,
plus the part-time admin.
Plus part-time you lose.
DPW, we take public safety guardrails out of play that are trying to protect the public, and
Line painting.
we're out of compliance with stormwater. So You don't see that in the 799, and not everyone saw your narrative explaining it, but those are pretty dire circumstances for those three critical departments, which speaks to the earlier vote that we took, which was to support the override. So, is that a good summation in terms of the critical pieces, Ben?
I think so.
No. So that's it. I would encourage that informational guide to be met with toot sweet efficiency. I think that needs to get out really quickly. Like Tuesday morning after the select board meeting. Because there's still a little bit of misinformation, there's a little bit of not totally informed. I think this informational guide hits all of those particular points. It may not change a vote, sway a vote, but it answers the questions, and that's all we can do.
Mark, if these, so the numbers we're looking at right now, these, if the override were to fail, these, the way you've already kind of, I don't want to get myself in trouble, we've already kind of portioned these cuts out, like, is that set in stone? You can't, I look at the numbers, there's things I would do completely different, but I don't want to get into that right now. But this is set in stone like this, like?
No.
Jeremy, can you throw
Okay.
up the red budget? So it's the same one you had before, the green versus the red, yep.
Right.
So, Jeremy, this, nope, try again.
Tony?
Tony, thank you. This is one of the reasons why, Finance Committee needs to take a vote, right? So in the event that the override fails on Monday, the 24th, then we need a reduced services budget to go to the town with for June 27th. This is alluding back to my comment earlier again, right, which was legal's recommendation, which is to have a blank budget question, so not have questions 2 and 5, but just to have question 2, which allows us to go either way depending on the outcome of the vote. But we need an approved budget from FinCom on what that reduced services looks like, right? This is the proposed piece. I think the important thing to keep in mind, and Mark already alluded to this a little bit, you could wipe out, several departments and you still don't have enough money to cover police, fire, and DPW.
Right,
right?
but you could lessen the impact on police
So
and fire.
you could lessen the impact, but you're gonna
Significantly.
also impact the
Right.
quality of life of residents in the town by
Right.
taking away critical services that some people have.
No, definitely, no, I agree, I'm just, yeah.
And it's also one of those things, right? Like, everything comes with implications to it. Mark alluded to earlier, seems ironic, right? We're doing reductions, why did employee benefits go up by X percentage, right?
No,
Like,
that
but
makes
what-
sense, yeah.
Because you have to move money, but also keep in mind, you look at things like the library, you could say, okay, well, that's easy, that's $140,000 we can grab, it is, but they have trust funds, now you have to dissolve the trust funds, now you have to deal with the building that's vacant, so your costs, your savings is not gonna be $194,000, now you have additional people you're gonna have to pay unemployment to. By the time you're done the whole thing, you're lucky if you net $20,000, if not less than that, because of all the costs you've had to incur as a result. So it seems like an easy grab, but it's not really impactful and doesn't really get you what you're looking for at the end of the day.
Yep, no, that makes sense, yep.
But to Tony's point and to the far right-hand column, and your point, we need to vote on that.
So-
When is the question?
When this article is approved, wherever the article went, where'd it go?
Right, so it doesn't have to be done this evening.
So it depends on what we're gonna do for the town meeting articles, right? If the select board and FinCom, if everyone's on board, said, these are the articles, we don't wanna do a blank budget article, we want them as written, usually when we submit the warrant, we submit here's what those itemized numbers are, right? Because I'm gonna vote essentially bottom line, here's the amount of money I want to spend on legal, here's reserve fund. But if you guys don't have an approved reduced services budget, then I'm hesitant to attach something to the warrant.
Is this number gonna change between now, is it gonna change?
So the final number shouldn't change there. I take that back, I'm gonna add one caveat. I did screw up in all of this, and I rounded up on free cash by $1. So somewhere along the line, I need to reduce expenses and revenues by $1. If I can have the leeway of FinCom to make that executive decision, I was just gonna take it from reserve fund and reduce you to $49,999.
Take it out of our
Mike,
budget.
Can you reduce your budget by $1?
If I don't have to reduce it by
If we want to vote on this
232,000,
now and it's not
There you
going
go,
to
you
change.
found your dollar.
The
So-
reason that I didn't want to vote on this because it was going to change, or again, I think we need to,
Tim?
I don't know.
Oh, you had us on the edge of our seat.
If we're convinced that this is not going to change, again, we're not voting to recommend it, or, I mean, we're not,
But you have to
We're
have,
voting to
I think it-
approve
I
the
think it
number.
is.
but you have to have the backup for it, right? Like, you have to show your math. So if we're gonna put that on the warrant, then we have to have, I mean, I don't know if the select board is going to approve putting the article as is without the backup, right? Generally, when we post the warrant, if we
what do you
post a
mean by the
number,
backup?
that sheet with the red and green.
This here.
Yep,
So if
that's
this
the
isn't going
backup.
to change,
That's up to you guys whether or not it's gonna change, right? So you already approved the green column, so we're good on that. So the question is, where are we on the red column? It seems like in the discussions the committee has had in the last 20 minutes or so, there seems to be some discussion about whether or not there's a desire to modify any of those numbers.
So, so to your point, the total number may not change. To Tony's point, might want to have a bite of the apple in terms of the detail. And to your point is you can't do the article without the detail. And I don't know that we're prepared to, we might be, but to vote on the detail that supports the total number that's not going to change. That's kind of where.
if the 7389216 is not going to change, then there's no reason why we can't vote on this. As long as the 7389216 doesn't change.
But Heather needs the detail of the makeup of that.
So I think the select board's gonna want, I mean, we can ask Carol, she's only one member of the board.
We don't vote line by line. Traditionally, have we voted this cost center by cost center?
In years past, you have.
Yes, yeah.
But I think in this case, just voting it as a full package works too, but I understand, and this is again why, right? My initial recommendation before, it's come up a couple meetings, the recommendation of legal was to do just one budget article and not say any specifics in it and let everything come out in the motion. Because that way you have until, the election's the 24th, you have until the 25th and 26th to finalize what you have for proposed reduced services. And maybe you don't necessarily need them, right? You get to the 25th, it passed, you're all good, you don't ever need to talk about that budget again. You get to town meeting, you're ready to go with the proposed level services budget, you put it on the floor before town meeting, and see how it goes.
Yeah, I would be hesitant to vote on these because we had nothing to do with these. How you got here, you did some explanation tonight, but I don't think we've broken it down and looked at it.
Yeah, that was my point, with just,
Huh?
that was my point.
Yeah, I mean, can I vote a number, but that's saying that we assume that all of this was done and we're happy with it?
So, again, I think that's fine, but I think there needs to be a plan for when is FinCom going to be able to address and sit down and review those pieces, because we're running out of weeks, right, to get to town meeting. Like,
Okay.
we don't want to get to town meeting and not have FinCom having reviewed this, with this being a possibility where, this might be the budget we're looking at.
So we voted to approve a override contingent budget, but yet we didn't go cost center by cost center.
Correct, and I think,
Why are we
again, I
doing
think that's
cost center
fine.
by cost center on the non-contingent budget?
Well, you don't have to, but if you don't, see the numbers that are there, Board of Health X dollars, this X dollars, that
Yeah.
Y, that's what's gonna be voted at town meeting. So theoretically speaking, even though you're not voting those individual pieces, you could vote just the bottom line, but then what I'm gonna end up putting before the public is the numbers you see there. And remember, last year, we just transitioned going into FY '24's budget, we used to vote every single account line. Purchase services, supplies, like, it was detailed out to that point. we reduced it, giving more flexibility to the departments, which has worked out really well, and say we just vote bottom line. Now, if we just want to vote town budget-wide, $7,389,216, I mean, there's nothing that says you can't do that, but if you vote the budget like that with no specification to the details, then you'll never see a year-end transfer, because we'll just do all internal transfers amongst departments, and I don't think that's the objective of the FinCom, and that's usually not a best practice, right? Would make things a lot easier to manage the budget, but I wouldn't recommend it.
I would recommend that Finance Committee schedule another meeting just for the far right-hand column, soon, within a week.
Okay?
So, and.
That gives Tony the chance to get, bad choice of words, but a little bit more in the weeds
I don't,
on
just,
it.
and just to be clear, I don't have any one major,
Right.
like, it's funny because you brought up the library, it's a good point. Like, for me, it's just the heavily weighted percentage cuts to fire, police, DPW. I just want to go through things, you know, obviously, there's not enough room there to eliminate it, but if there's anything, I have a lot of faith in what you did, I just want to see it, because if there's any way to minimize it at all, even a little bit, I'm hoping we don't get there, personally, I don't know if I can say that, but.
Right.
But if we do, I don't want it to look like it looked there. But there may not be an option, I don't know, so.
Again, my recommendation is not to vote on it this evening, but to have a meeting next week, literally on the only remaining item for us to address is the far right-hand column, assuming that the override does not pass. Could be a 30-minute meeting, could be a 2-hour and 30-minute meeting, but that's what I'd like to do.
I'd agree with that.
I don't think we need a motion on that. And with that, I think we came in with accomplishing the business that we wanted to. One, we approved the budget, assuming the override. We approved the informational guide. We decided to wait on the warrant articles until town council and the select board puts their fingerprint on it one more time. And we've decided to meet specifically and separately for the override, the budget without the override passing. So.
Move for adjournment.
Could we recognize Tim speeding all the way from Framingham
Carol,
to
got
be here as quickly as possible? And thank you very much. Carol?
Maybe I'm missing something, but doesn't your bylaw say that the finance committee's work on the budget, annual budget, shall be conducted in sufficient time to meet the warrant articles? Deadlines established by the select board. So we've got our articles on Monday, aren't you supposed to have presented a budget for those?
Well, I
Isn't
guess
that what we got into a problem with for
Yep.
the?
I guess the question is, haven't we done that? I think we have approved
Okay.
the budget. What, to your point, what we haven't approved is the secondary contingency budget, which I think the bylaws are silent on what our responsibility is there, which goes back to the exchange of, well, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Do we want to read the warrant article that's been approved and then approve it? Or do we approve the budget that becomes the warrant article? That's the question. On the contingency, I think we voted on and passed the budget this evening with an override. I think that's our obligation. I think we've met that.
Okay, so is it in your?
I think, I'm happy to be corrected, but I don't want it to be felt that we didn't complete the requirements of the bylaws and our requirement. I believe we have. What we haven't is in this unusual territory of having to vote for a second budget in the event that an override doesn't pass. That we have not done.
So throughout the budget process, which started back last year, you haven't gone through any of the budgets and reviewed them personally. You've just taken the numbers that have been presented by the town administrator and not is that what I'm hearing, that you have not done any
I think
cuts
we've
or?
reviewed the budget at the level where it was the budget that we approved. I don't think we have a line item gone through the not override contingent articles, the reductions.
So are you anticipating that may change and there's a bigger deficit or a smaller deficit, or are you gonna balance it if that's the case?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I follow the question.
Well-
Are you indicating that you are not comfortable with how we've, for example, when the fire department comes in and makes a presentation of their budget, we have the detail in front of us while we're presented that. And historically, we may have taken a vote on the approval of that particular budget. But there's 6 or 8 that come before us, and there's 47 cost centers, so there's 30 that don't come before us. So have we individually voted the Finance Committee budget for $170? No, I don't think we have specifically in the minutes voted for that. But it was implied when we see the particular detail, including the Finance Committee at $170, that when we approve that budget, by extension, we've approved the Finance Committee budget of $170. That's my general feeling.
Okay, I'll continue to be confused then. That's all I've got to say.
I've got to excuse myself.
So,
This is really cool.
I think we agreed that we were not going to do that particular budget, so we unfortunately didn't meet early so we could meet late. We met early because a couple of people have a hard close and some personal commitments on the other end. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
We'll try to make.